So welcome everyone to the second session of the third global conference of the One Planet Network Sustainable Food Systems Program. Our session is appropriately entitled Aligning Collective Action to Achieve the SDGs, because I think we all know that the need for collective action couldn't be coming at a more important time. We'll be hearing from a fantastic panel of speakers to see what they're doing and what we can all do from a range of different sectors and levels of action to achieve the SDGs and reach food system sustainability. And as you know, the goal of the SFS program itself is to foster these types of multi-stakeholder exchanges and partnerships to catalyze more sustainable food system production and consumption, and to recognize that food system solutions have to be tackled in an integrated way. So my name is Chantal Clément, and I'm the Deputy Director of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, and I'm happy to be your moderator today and guide us through what I'm sure will be a very rich discussion. So first, as you would have heard in the opening session, the goal of this conference is to strengthen our common vision that understands that only multi-stakeholder collaborations can bring about this profound transformation that we need to address the current challenges within our food systems. I think secondly, we're just at the end of the first year of a decade of action to deliver the SDGs. This gives us just under 10 years to ramp up our action and accelerate the adoption of sustainable solutions to meet a series of ongoing challenges that we all are very familiar with at this point. We all also know that food is either directly or indirectly linked to all of the 17 SDGs, given the interconnected economic, environmental, and social dimensions of our food systems. And thirdly, we've also been reminded that our conference is only half a year away from the first ever UN Food Systems Summit in 2021. And I think we really all hope that this will be used as an opportunity to raise awareness and help solidify a global commitment to transform our food systems to serve people and planet. And as this session's title stresses, I think we know that it's only through truly participatory, inclusive, and broad-based collective action that we can get there. I just heard from our WWF colleague who just spoke that we don't have a lot of time to achieve all of this because we know that there's an ongoing climate emergency, an ongoing public health crisis. We have the need to ensure resilient livelihoods for food and farm workers and ensure accessible and healthy diets for all. But before we get to our speakers who will have a chance to introduce themselves, I wanted to briefly give you a quick overview of our session. So we'll hear first from Mrs. Elizabeth Mrema, Ms. Julia Sanchez, and Dr. Francesco Branca to frame our discussion. And then we'll be hearing from Ms. Carmen Torres about a recent assessment of multi-stakeholder mechanisms for food systems change. We'll then hear from Mrs. Esther Penunia, Mrs. Huram Erdal, and Mr. Jason Bayarjon to give us some concrete insights and experiences in developing collaborations for food systems change. I'm thanking in advance our speakers to try to stick to their speaking times, which I know are very brief, but we have a lot of you on and we hope to have a good discussion. And in the interest of not interrupting you while you speak, you will get a reminder in the chat from our support team when you're coming close to your time. After our presentations, we'll have a panel discussion between all of the speakers before opening it up to a Q&A session. So for all of our participants listening in, please do feel free to send comments and questions through the chat function, and we'll share these with our panelists during the Q&A. So with that, I welcome our first speaker, Mrs. Elizabeth Maruma Mrema, who's the Executive Secretary of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. As some of you may know, the CBD is currently in the midst of a negotiation process to deliver a new 10-year global biodiversity framework, and we'll hear some of her insights of this work via a recorded message, which we can launch now. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that I cannot be there with you in person, but it is an honor to speak to you today at this third global conference of the One Planet Sustainable Food Systems Program. Let me start by highlighting one of the pressing challenges we face today. Namely, how do we secure universal access to sufficient, nutritious, safe, healthy, and affordable food for all, while we are experiencing interlocking crises of biodiversity loss, environmental degradation, and climate change. Diets are at the core of human health and a healthy planet. However, our current conventional methods of food production are undermining our health and the health and productivity of our ecosystems. For example, 1, Food and land use systems occupy nearly 40% of the ice-free surface of the Earth and are responsible for the continuing conversion of the world's tropical forests, grasslands, wetlands, and other remaining natural habitats. Second, agriculture is responsible for up to 80% of the world's freshwater use and 20% of the global greenhouse gas production. 3, the food we buy and eat is becoming more homogenized. Today, 75% of humanity's food is generated from only 12 plants and 5 animal species. And lastly, incentive agriculture, livestock production, and land use change drive pandemic risks. Furthermore, environmental harmful agricultural incentives remain at around $100 billion in OECD countries, clearly indicating that there are significant opportunities for policy action. We urgently need to reverse these trends and recognize that biodiversity for food and agriculture is indispensable to food security and for the achievement of sustainable development goals. Biodiversity underpins the productivity and resilience of agriculture, making production systems and livelihood more resilient to shocks and stresses, including those caused by climate change. Without healthy nature and biodiversity, we cannot have quality nutrition. And without quality nutrition, we cannot have good health. Let us be clear. If we are to be successful in the transformations that we are seeking, we will need the voices of all stakeholders, from fisher folks and small farmers to women in the fields, from food-related businesses to indigenous peoples and local communities, and from city dwellers to policymakers. A whole of society approach will be critical. To set us into a transformative path, the 5th Global Biodiversity Outlook, recently released by the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, looks to future and outlines a number of interdependent transitions that collectively move our societies into a more sustainable coexistence with nature. This includes 2 important transitions that are extremely pertinent to our discussions today. 1, sustainable agricultural transition that suggests redesigning agricultural systems through agroecological and other innovative approaches to enhance productivity while minimizing negative impacts on biodiversity. 2, sustainable food systems transition that promotes sustainable and healthy diets with a greater emphasis on a diversity of food and more moderate consumption of meat and fish, as well as dramatic cuts in the waste involved in food supply and consumption, especially when we know that 28% of the world's agricultural area is used annually to produce food that is lost or wasted. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, to be adopted by the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity in 2021, will also be an opportunity to address these challenges in an integrated manner and build the resilience we need in the face of growing environmental, healthy, and development challenges. Let me finish by highlighting the importance of this conference as a contribution to the United Nations Food Systems Summit to be convened by the United Nations Secretary General in 2021. The efforts to advocate for multi-stakeholder, inclusive collaboration, integrated policymaking, and systems-based approaches will be critical to achieve the transformations we are all seeking to achieve. I wish you a successful deliberations over the next 2 weeks And I look forward to hearing the recommendations that will emanate from these important deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. I think a great reminder that when we consider food systems, we have to do so holistically, that biodiversity is a fundamental part of what we need to protect, and that everyone is important to take on an integrated approach that we need. So next up, I think we already knew that there was a strong relationship between planetary and human health, but these linkages have been made all the more evident by the ongoing COVID pandemic. So I now give the floor to Dr. Francesco Branca, who's the director of the Department of Nutrition for Health and Development at the WHO, to tell us more about the relevance of these connections. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you and good day to all. It's a great opportunity to speak to you about the interaction between food system and health. And a beautiful report produced by IPES Food a couple of years ago actually highlighted the multiple pathways of this interaction. First of all, unhealthy diet and the different forms of malnutrition that are responsible for about 20% of the global burden of disease. But second, food insecurity. We know that about 690 million people do still lack adequate energy to make their living. Third, unsafe food. 420,000 deaths every year, 1/3 of them young children, for food which is unsafely stored or prepared. Fourth, the health of food workers that adds 200,000 deaths every year to the burden. And last, the environmental contamination that comes from the use of chemicals in the environment, but also comes from the production systems. And I'd like to highlight particularly the importance of the close connections between animal and human health. We know that the majority of the emerging new diseases, infectious diseases, are actually coming from animal sources. In the last 50 years, 75% of the emerging pathogens have come from animals. The Creutzfeldt-Jakob variant, the mad cow disease, the avian influenza, and now COVID-19. Some diseases are related to the industrial production chain, such as Salmonella or Campylobacter. Some diseases are neglected, diseases that have been addressed successfully in high-income countries but are not addressed in low-income countries, such as Brucella or bovine TB. But the most threatening are the diseases with potential for global spread, like COVID. So we need to take action there. We need to take action to reduce this major health impact. And we can improve food environments. We can ask consumers to shift their consumption patterns. We need to have adequate food control systems to improve the practices related to the production of food, for example, those related to the trade of live wild animals and the farming practices. We need to use a One Health approach with a collaboration, multi-sectoral, transdisciplinary, to achieve optimal health outcomes and recognizing the interaction between people, animal, plants, and their shared environment. We can do that with adequate coordination. I also call to the coming World Food Systems Summit as an opportunity to do this, but we do have adequate policy framework that were produced, for example, by the Second International Conference of Nutrition. We have a decade of action on nutrition declared by the General Assembly of the United Nations, in which we can all act on this all at the same time. The tripartite work bringing together WHO, FAO, and the Organization of Animal Health is one of the opportunities to do this. But I look forward to the discussion today to hear how we can more proactively and creatively address these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And again, stressing the need for these integrated measures and the need for coordination to meet current challenges, knowing that the WHO already has a very good framework for this type of work. I'll now give the floor to Ms. Julia Sanchez, who's the Secretary General of ActionAid, to tell us more about the urgency for global food systems reform now and whose voices we should be centering in these discussions. So Julia, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. So ActionAid International, for those who are less familiar, is a global federation working for a world free from poverty and injustice. We are present through different ActionAids, national ActionAids in about 50 countries in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. And we work, among other things, on sustainable livelihoods and climate justice. We believe at ActionAid that many of the challenges that we face, including food insecurity, are a question of injustice at the end of the day. And so we apply a human rights-based approach to all our work. And within that, we pay close attention to power dynamics and how they influence the outcomes that we have. So I'm going to quickly speak to three things. So why the food system conversation is so urgent today, what our proposals for a good food system are, and finally, some proposals for the Food Systems Summit that is coming up. So why is it so urgent that we be having this conversation? Unfortunately, we are not on track to end hunger by 2030 with the SDGs, and we could actually start going into reverse mode, among other things, because of the impact of COVID. The world is not on track to achieve zero hunger, and if recent trends continue, the number of people affected by hunger would surpass 840 million by 2030. COVID-19 may add between 83 to 132 million people to the total number of undernourished in the world in 2020. Still, 2 billion people cannot access adequate food in the world, while we are witnessing simultaneously an increase in obesity and non-communicable diseases across all countries. Second, there is increased inequality in the food system. There's inequality between those who can access adequate nutritious food and those who cannot, between those who hold power over food systems, and in particular agribusiness, and then small-scale food producers who produce most of the food around the world. And third, the next planting season is currently at risk. From our own research at ActionAid, we've seen that as a result of measures taken to contain the spread of COVID, smallholder women farmers in particular have reduced access to inputs such as seeds and fertilizers, and due to their increased cost and the lockdown restrictions. So this, coupled with an apparent lack of prioritization by governments to employ innovative and supportive strategies and mechanisms for smallholder farmers at this time, is putting the next planting season at risk. So these are three reasons why it is very urgent and timely that we're having this conversation. The urgency to move towards more sustainable food systems is echoed by food sovereignty and smallholder food producers and social movements. CSOs, FAO, CFS, and the UN Secretary General, by convening the Food Systems Summit, are all pointing to this urgency. So second, going forward, what does a food system need to look like? I'm just going to highlight two things today. First of all, we must rethink how we produce and consume our food. We need to address the unsustainable resource extraction that is now the modus operandi for most of our food consumption and production systems. We must reshape food systems in a way that address the multiple crises, so the economic, environmental, and social dimensions, and anchoring to the centrality of human rights with a human rights-based approach. It is about a political agenda dealing with power and power dynamics, and not a technical fix to resolve the current challenges. Second, a sustainable food system must be relocalized. We must give priority to the local and territorial markets with fresh and safe food available for consumption locally. This means prioritizing small-scale food producers and their rights to natural resources, including land, seeds, water, promoting food diversification, biodiversity, and ecosystem regeneration. We must adapt to climate change and minimize its contribution to agriculture, of agriculture to global warming. So agroecology, as was already mentioned in the few minutes we've had, is the viable solution for all the different crises and from the multiple dimensions, including the distribution of power. So as we look ahead to the Food Systems Summit, a couple of priorities. As part of the civil society organizations group working on food sovereignty and engaged particularly with the UN food agencies and the Committee on World Food Security, over the past year, ActionAid and others have accumulated several concerns around the summit. We recommend that the summit adopts a rights-based approach that addresses the power imbalances in the food system head-on, especially one that provides space for meaningful engagement and involvement of those most affected by food insecurity and their organizations, while ensuring their contribution from an indigenous knowledge and experience perspective. The summit must provide a space for candid conversation on how to do four things. 1, resource and support sustainable food production methods through agroecology. 2, rein in the runaway agribusinesses that only benefit a few and contribute to widespread ecological crises. 3, denounce attacks of human rights and environmental rights defenders. And finally, support the ongoing negotiations for a binding treaty on business and human rights. Thank you.
Thanks so much for raising these urgencies and again stressing the need to listen to all constituencies in the food system, and for also giving us a glimpse of the values and structures that really should underpin a sustainable food system. Just quickly to all the participants, if you can't see the question box on the right-hand side, you'll just need to reload your screen and you should be able to have access to it to ask questions for later. So with that, thanks to all three of our speakers for these really useful contributions to open up our discussion. We heard from three quite different perspectives, but I think we can see that they're all working towards a shared goal for sustainable food systems transition, and that these commonalities are exactly what we're all meant to be teasing out here. So with that, I'm now pleased to give the floor to Ms. Carmen Torres, who's a consultant for the One Planet Network's Sustainable Food Systems Program's Community of Practice work. And she'll be presenting the findings of a study which assesses multi-stakeholder mechanisms, which will be crucial, of course, for us to understand how and with whom we need to move forward with. You have 8 minutes.
Thank you, Chantal. Hello, everyone. Well, it is a pleasure for me to present you this study on multi-stakeholder mechanisms for food systems transformation. So the study has been commissioned by the Community of Practice on Food Systems Approach on the Ground, which is a group of organizations and countries, as you can see it in this slide. And the Community of Practice exists in the context of the One Planet Network Sustainable Food Systems Program. So what is the added value of this Community of Practice? Well, we want to build on the practical experience of our organizations regarding the implementation of food systems approach on the ground. So translate food systems theory into practice. And we focus on strengthening the governance structures for the increased uptake of food systems approach by decision makers. So we have several areas of collaboration, and this study builds or stems from each one of these areas. So we have this call for adopting a food systems approach by many reports, global pacts, declarations at high-level forums, etc. But what does it really mean to adopt a food systems approach? So there is an increasing consensus that it is necessary to adopt this holistic approach to tackle complex intertwined problems. And in particular, applying this food system lens means that we need to rethink the governance of food systems. So what does it mean? It means to move from a sectorial approach to a holistic approach, but also to include the different perceptions and the different actors in the food systems in decision-making processes. So multi-stakeholder governance is increasingly seen and recognized as a way forward in the participatory governance of complex global issues and for adopting a food systems approach. But how does this multi-stakeholder governance looks in practice? So in practice, it's just bringing multiple stakeholders together to participate in dialogue, in decision-making, and in the implementation of responses to jointly perceived problems. So very practically speaking, these mechanisms refer to formal or informal participatory governance mechanisms that bring different food systems actors, so different constituencies, government, NGOs, private sector, etc., from all the phases of the supply chain, from production to consumption, but also connect different food systems agendas, so environment, health, trade, etc. And in general, these mechanisms are connected to a holistic food policy or an ongoing effort or attempt to adopt this holistic food systems approach. So this is how multi-stakeholder food system mechanisms look like. No, we wouldn't call ourselves a community of practice of sustainable food systems approach on the ground. This is what we had to share. This is how multi-stakeholder collaboration mechanisms look like. So what do we know about these mechanisms? We know they take different shapes, names, and roles. We know that at subnational level, food policy councils is the most commonly used term, but we have different terms. And we also know that they take a different range of forms in relation to their durability, the legal status, the representativeness. They operate at different scales, local, subnational, municipal, national, and the roles and mandates also vary. They can bring multiple stakeholders together, sometimes to share perspectives, sometimes to develop innovative solutions, and sometimes to influence policy-related food policy and planning. More and more often, they are also engaged in implementation. So we know these mechanisms are being formed all around the world at subnational level, at national level. There is available sound evidence that show the potential they have to deal with multiple challenges, but the evidence and data about these mechanisms is still vague and still fragmented. So we really need to fill the aforementioned gaps, given the potential they have shown, and in that sense contribute to our efforts to support and accelerate the shift towards sustainable food systems transformation. And this will be also an important input for the upcoming Food Systems Summit. So what is the purpose of the study? We want to raise awareness and share knowledge on multi-stakeholder mechanisms in order to foster innovation and stimulate the emergence of more of these mechanisms at different levels. So we set up a general objective. We want to, at the beginning, map national and subnational mechanisms to understand and share their contribution to embedding this food systems approach into policy-making processes. So we have set 4 specific objectives. First, we want to understand how these mechanisms are supporting governments to better work in coordination with actors, integrate sustainability policies with other policies in the food systems agenda at different levels and with a holistic approach. Then we want to describe concrete examples of concrete achievements coming from these mechanisms in relation to the promotion of these sustainable food systems and capture the key challenges they are facing all around the world. We want to understand their formats, the sustainability principles, the key food systems priorities, the way they are engaging the actors, which actors also, and analyze also how these factors influence successes and achievements of results. And finally, we want this to promote the share of knowledge and foster innovation, as I said before, to catalyze more support and stimulate the emergence of these mechanisms. We will have at the end of the initiative a knowledge product in the form of a website with different modules that everyone can access for advocacy purposes towards countries, but also for knowledge creation. So this will lead to an increased knowledge based on these mechanisms and the broader governance structures in which they operate and are embedded. So this is not just a study. We see this as an ongoing initiative to map and keep up to date with the emergence of this kind of mechanisms. So in a first step, we have selected, let's say, outstanding cases. So cases bringing all stakeholders together with strong government buy-in, connected to a holistic food policy, bringing in also the different perspective. And if you want to know more, because I won't have time to present the study now, you can join us at the side event on 2nd of December. And we will be presenting some highlights from 3 of these cases from Nairobi, London, and India. Thank you very much, and over to you, Chantal.
So again, thanks for raising these really important lessons learned from multi-stakeholder collaborations to see how they can be successful. And so now we'd like to get a bit more concrete and hear from practitioners and policymakers across a number of different continents to share their insights on how coordination is necessary and how it's happening in a number of different contexts. So first, I'll give the floor to Ms. Esther Penunia, who's the Director General of the Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development, to share some insights and lessons learned. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chantal, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from here in Manila. I would like to share my screen. Is my screen ready? I'm sorry, I don't think I am able to screen. Okay, I think I am not able to share my screen. I'm so sorry, but I will just go on with my presentation to be able to keep with the time. Okay, so first, let me tell you something about our organization, Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development. We have 22 member organizations in 16 countries with 13 million small-scale family farmers, women, men, youth engaged in crops, livestock, fisheries, forestry, herding, and pastoralism, and some of them belonging to indigenous people's communities. So let me tell you about family farmers around the world in Asia Pacific. Around the world, family farmers account for more than 90% of the farms globally, and 79% of them are in Asia and Pacific region. And then they produce more than 80% of the world's food in value terms. And farms less than 2 hectares account for 80% of all the farms, majority in Asia Pacific. And small-scale family-based food producers account for almost 80% of the milk and 80% of aquaculture farms, and majority of them are in Asia Pacific. But if you look at the statistics that are done by FAO in our region and globally, it's the family farmers who are the poorest and the hungriest in the world. Why? Because of 3 things. Now, first is we lack access and control over natural resources like land, water, forests, and seeds. They are like what Action Aid colleagues said earlier, they are maybe in the hands of landlords and elites or big private companies. So technological resources, we also lack physical resources, social, financial, and market resources. Second, we have insignificant involvement in policy-making processes that affect our lives. And third, there is degraded ecosystems and vulnerabilities in price and climate shocks, as well as political, socio-cultural conflicts, leading to migration, aging, low pride, and low esteem in farming. So young farmers right now do not want to go into agriculture. No farmer will mean no food, and no food will mean no future, because we will all die if we don't have food. Okay. But there is hope right now, because after decades of neglect for family farming agriculture, we have hopes in the United Nations Decade on Family Farming from 2019 to 2028. This declaration of the UN Decade on Family Farming is a multi-stakeholder process of advocacy led by CSOs and farmers organization, spearheaded by the World Rural Forum, and then supported by FAO and IFAD and member governments, especially Costa Rica and Philippines, among others. So it has a global action plan right now. The global action plan has 7 pillars, and 3 of these pillars are cross-cutting. First is the enabling policy environment. Second is supporting the youth, and third is promoting gender equality. And there are the other 4 pillars that promote policies on climate resilient agriculture, on multi-functionality of agriculture, and the strengthening of family farmers organizations. FAO has analyzed the global action plan, and they say that the global action plan contributes to all of the 17 SDGs. That's why the UNDFF is seen as an accelerator to achieve the SDGs. When we effectively implement the global action plan, especially at the national level, we will be able to increase the chances of achieving the SDGs. Okay. So So in AFA, we have aligned our program with regards to the UNDFF, but we have 5 priority thematic agenda: rights to natural resources, sustainable, resilient agroecological systems in farms, fisheries, and forests, cooperative development and strengthening, women empowerment, youth in agriculture. And we do this through movement building, policy advocacy, capacity building, business development, servicing, internal governance, and monitoring. And all of this through multi-stakeholder partnerships. And these multi-stakeholder partnerships are in terms of financing, or in terms of technical assistance, or in terms of synergies. Let me tell you 4 examples of how we operationalize this at the global, regional, and national levels. First, we have the Farmers Forum of IFAD every 4 years. Before it was every 2 years, now it's every 4 years. IFAD gathers around 80 to 100 leaders of farmers organizations all over the world and at the global level. And the Farmers Forum is aimed to increase partnership between FOs and IFAD. And the process is, first, there is autonomous space among the CSOs, and then there is interaction and dialogue with the IFAD management, and then there is a presentation at the Governing Council of IFAD to present a synthesis of deliberation. So this happens at the global and at the regional and at the national level. Okay, so our gains in this process has been the inclusion of farmers organizations in the IFAD formulation of country strategy papers, direct financing for farmers organizations, capacity building. Second is the decade itself on family farming, because there is an inclusive international steering committee. So CSOs and farmers organizations are represented in this steering committee, and the global action plan is being operationalized through the national action plans. And while this is government-led, there is encouragement that the national action plan will be inclusive, multi-stakeholder. So right now, there are multi-stakeholder national action plans formulated already in Nepal and Indonesia, with advanced process in the Philippines, and at initial stage in Bangladesh, India, Japan, and Kyrgyzstan. And the AFA ambition is all the 16 countries where AFA has members. At the end of 2028, we have national action plans being implemented in a multi-stakeholder process. So in these countries that I have mentioned, that is where national action plans of the UNDFF are ongoing, the family farmers who are our members or are part of our platform have been very influential and have led in the advocacy for this. The second is the CFS. I think you all know the Committee on Food Security. So there is the CSM, the Civil Society Mechanism. AFA is part of the CSM. It was a coordinating committee before, but now it's just an active member. And then there's, of course, a private sector mechanism, and then there's the member states. So there is a process of open-ended working groups, of the yearly conventions of the CFS. And our gains here is that CFS has turned out so many sub-instruments like the VGGT, the RAI, and the various reports of the high-level panel of experts. So when these policy instruments are approved at the global level, at the region, and at the national, we partner to implement this. Like, for example, with the ILC and with the International Land Coalition for the VGGT and RAI, as well as with the ASEAN and Grow Asia. The Grow Asia is a partnership between ASEAN, the farmers, and the business groups. And then the SAARC Agriculture Center, which is the regional research center for South Asia, and the International Cooperative Alliance for the cooperatives, strengthening the cooperatives and implementing the UNDFF at the region and at the national level. Okay, and the fourth and the last one is the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program. So it's a multilateral funding facility, the GAFSP. It has an inclusive governance structure. I think it's very unique. That this GAFSP is very unique because it has an inclusive governance structure where there are donor representatives of donor governments, recipient countries, and CSOs. And the 3 CSOs who are there represent Africa, Asia, and North NGOs. AFA represents Asia, and ActionAid represents the North NGOs. And the steering committee is the key decision maker in terms of where funding will be allocated in what country, and also the kind of the directions and the strategies. So our key gains as CSO representatives in this GAFSP is, first, we were able to push for criteria on CSO participation in terms of evaluating the proposals given by countries. And then there's direct financing to farmers organizations right now through the new track, the modality 2 in GAFSP, that we receive funds to monitor the implementation at the country level, especially check the engagement of the farmers organizations and get the feedback of the farmers through their organizations on the workings of GAFSP. So there is increased chance of engagement at the country level when they know about the project and they are involved in the design, implementation, and monitoring at the country level. Okay. So these are the 4 examples of how we implement multi-stakeholder platforms. So in conclusion, we think that the road to achieving SDGs can be achieved by investing in family farming organization, putting them at the heart and center of all these inclusive multi-stakeholder processes, and also investing in them, especially in financing, in capacity building, so that we can play our role. Now we can play a role as equal partners in design and implementation, in monitoring and evaluation, and as solution providers to the issues that are raised on the table in these multi-stakeholder platforms. Back to you, Chantal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for bringing up these really concrete opportunities for action at the international and national levels that really connect with what's happening on the ground. I'd now like to give the floor to Huram Erdal, who is the Strategy Development Manager for the municipality of Mezitli, to tell us about their municipality's approach to tackling food system issues. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chantal. So I'd like to share my presentation with the group. Yes. Mezitli is one of the Mediterranean sea sites located and also with lovely archaeological sites and 300 days sunny central seas of Mersin province in Turkey, where citizens from different cultures and religions are living together in peace and respect since Cso time. Mezitli has 195,000 citizens, with 51% of them are women, and we have almost 60,000 registered and unregistered Syrians living with us in Mezitli. Our city's summer population is almost 300,000 without Syrians. We have 40 neighborhoods from seaside to the Toroslar mountains of the city. Landscape of Mezitli is 416 kilometers square almost, and 36 kilometers square are constructed and planned areas. Main sectors of the city are agriculture, service, and tourism. Unemployment and social pressure on women's participation to working environment is the main challenge of our women. What I mean with social pressure is women are not used to work outside the house as a professional businesswoman. Turkey's family culture and government await be a mom, wife, sister, daughter from a woman. None of the public organizations provide child care for moms from 0 to 6 age. Men do not encourage women for being a businesswoman. Our municipality established a kindergarten and cares kids from 36 months to 60 months before primary school as a beginning. So we try to provide opportunity for women to be a businesswoman in the city life. The women producers market model and physical environment established by the needs and abilities of women living in Mezitli as an accessible construction. Mezitli women will produce fresh fruits and vegetables at the hills, at their houses, gardens, handcraft and handmade food products at their homes in city center without any permission from men. Each woman producers markets are open for just women and for 2 days a week. There are kids parks close to the markets, and we had to include women in the economical, political, and social life by their possible opportunities, which they already have. The needs of women are employment, working from home while being a mom, wife, and a daughter, raising awareness and capacity increasing on several topics such as laws, economical and political issues, women and human rights, and development of knowledge on sustainable producing, living in environment. We had to include women in the social, economical, political, and daily life by their possible opportunities, which they already have. According to our SWOT and SOAR analysis, we decided to create an initiative. Women producer markets created for employment of women from all neighborhoods of the city of Medjugorje. All producer women from each social, political, economical, educational, or ethnic situations without any cost will join the markets. Now there are 9 markets from north to the south of Medjugorje at 9 different neighborhoods with almost 650 entrepreneurs. Our target is developing more markets with sustainable organic products and innovative marketing styles. The only criteria of being a woman producer in our markets are being a producer and living in Medjugorje. We started by organizing the legal legislative infrastructure with assemble approved management docs and related staff's tasks. Then one of our women assembled members and our technical expert responsible for the implementation process. SWOT and SOAR analysis done for the city with 40 neighborhoods. We did announce the opening of women producers market after the analysis and got the applications. According to the applications, we are designing the size and the place of the market. We created a team from related departments of the municipality. For the creation of the market, we created a model together with our civil engineers, women producers, related technical and managerial representatives, developing and creating a sales strategy is another challenge for us. We tried to overcome that challenge by developing their own monitoring committee by themselves. The monitoring committee members are all women who are representing the markets. They are monitoring and balancing prices with the free economy daily. Women are coming to the market by their own. It was being hard for them to achieving their markets by public transportation or by a friend's or husband's or a family car. They encourage themselves for learning and having their independency on all fields. After 2 years, some of them learned how to drive, to get their licenses, cars. We tried to teach them how to fish instead of serving a fish. So analyzing the current situation of women producers in 40 neighborhoods and assemble decisions, stay strong against the local markets, men representatives, creation of strong sales strategy for women with subsidiaries, and also capacity increasing of women on social, economical, environmental, and global development goals. So our challenge and solutions, if you look forward that, establishing a women producer market with free conditions for women was a challenge for us. Local market representatives who have the pay rent for their stands in local markets situated against the women producers markets establishment. Our mayor and assembly members, who are our politicians, stayed strong and together. They had never stepped back, and developing a marketing strategy is one of the challenges of our project. Product prices and presentations should be more sustainable and standard. We are trying to make them understand the cost of price strategy, and they do not have any rental or managerial costs and taxes costs, but they still trying to put high prices for the products. So it was hard to change their price policies. We tried to solve that by raising awareness on capacity increasing meetings with leading volunteer businesswomen. We are collaborating with volunteers and non-governmental organizations who would like to share their knowledge with women. Trying to answer women's needs by ice-breaking activities like picnics at hills, going to the cinema, or traveling to other cities of Turkey, and seminars like women's rights, human rights, and being a mom, being an entrepreneur, finance, management of own budget, etc. It's hard to break women's shelf. It was really hard. And also, what we learned during that process, being open to all women producers living in Nestle is our innovation. From all education, origin, religion, social democracy levels, political ideas. And we tried, and if the relevance to the Sustainable Development Goals, we tried to balance the gender equality goal with a market just for women, good health and well-being with accessible healthy food to all, affordable and clean energy goal by climating markets by solar energy climates, and also sustainable cities and communities goal by teaching sustainable agriculture and women producers and customers to ask for sustainable sales from women producers. It came to being a Milan Food Pact Challenging Environment Award-winning city. The aim of the MUFPP is to share knowledge and understanding on food systems toward the world building of sustainable and inclusive cities. And we try to provide women.
Apologies, if we can ask you to briefly wrap up as we're getting to time. Thank you.
Yes, I just want to show you a short video regarding to our women producers market and the award. If you let me, just a quick.
Pandemi aniden başlayınca işlerimiz haliyle durdu. O zaman satış yapamadık, ürünlerimizden bayağı zarar gördük. Elimizde kaldık. Tabii bu bizim acıdan çok etkiledi. Öyle bekledik pandemi süresini. Pazar açıldıktan sonra yavaş yavaş satmaya başladık.
Tüm dünyada ve Türkiye'de olduğu gibi bizim ilçemizde de bu COVID-19 süreci oldukça zorlu geçti. Bizim kadın üretici pazarlarımız 9 tane 650 kadınımız var. Üretici pazarlarımızdaki kadınların bulunduğu mekandaki sağlık koşullarını iyileştirmemiz gerekiyor. Diğer taraftan tüketici olan müşterilerimizin de vatandaşlarımızın da sağlığını korumak durumundayız. Birini yapmadığımız zaman istenilen sonuca ulaşamayız. Burada küçük de olsa destekler bizim açımızdan tabii ki önemli. Gerek gönüllerimizin destekleri, gerek iş adamlarımızın destekleri, gerekse yine bizim Milan Paktı çerçevesinde Fransa'da aldığımız ödül çerçevesinde yapılan bize maddi destek bir hayat suyu gibi oldu ve bize burada bir nefes aldırdı ve destek sağladı. Bu anlamda da bize destek veren Milan Paktı yöneticilerine ve sorumlularına ben buradan da teşekkür ediyorum kendilerine destekler için.
Thank you very much.
So thanks for giving us this really concrete example of improving local food systems, and also for bringing up the gender inclusivity in your policies, which is of course extremely important. We'll now turn to our last speaker, Jason Bayerjean, who's Director of the Food Policy Division of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and he'll provide us with details on the development of Canada's federal food policy. And you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chantal. Thank you for the opportunity to participate on the panel and share Canada's experience in developing the food policy. I'm going to have to share my screen. Okay. All right, thank you. So the food policy was developed in response to social, health, environmental, and economic challenges in Canada's food system. For example, food security rates are particularly high in Canada's northern Indigenous communities and racialized communities. There are increasing rates of obesity and other diet and chronic related diseases among Canadians, and around half the food produced in Canada is wasted. The food policy was the consultation with stakeholders and the public emphasized the need for an integrated approach to addressing the challenges in our food system. The policy was officially launched in June 2019, has been under implementation for just over a year. It's Canada's first ever food policy and is a roadmap to a healthier and more sustainable food system. The process of developing the policy began with a mandate commitment from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food in 2015. As you can see on the slide, the government took a number of steps between 2015 and 2019 to develop and launch the policy, including conducting public consultations and collaborating across the government, which were two key parts of the multi-stakeholder approach we took. I'll provide a snapshot of these two processes to illustrate the importance of bringing together diverse partners and stakeholders to discuss food systems challenges and opportunities. The public consultations we conducted in 2017 included online engagement with nearly 45,000 Canadians, a national food policy summit with close to 300 representatives from various sectors of the food system, and regional engagement sessions across Canada. Civil society organizations played an important role in these consultations. In addition to participating in the summit, regional engagement sessions, and writing letters to the minister, they led 28 community-led engagement sessions across the country. We also asked national Indigenous organizations to identify their preferred way to engage on the food policy, which was through Indigenous-led engagement sessions. Through the consultations, we learned that some of the top priorities for those living in Canada were community-based approaches to improving access to safe and healthy food, reducing food loss and waste, and supporting equity and inclusion across the food system. Another important component of the approach we took was a whole of government collaboration for the earliest stages of the policy process. Just at the federal level in Canada, there are a number of departments and agencies that have mandates that impact or are impacted by food. We collaborated with 17 different federal departments and agencies to develop the food policy. This approach was key to understanding shared priorities, potential gaps in programming, and opportunities for increased collaboration on complex food system challenges. Following the consultations, coordination with colleagues across government, and internal analysis, the food policy was launched in 2019 with the vision you can see on the slide. The policy also includes four near-term action areas that are supported by funding, 6 long-term outcomes, and principles for implementation. The policy will be supported by an advisory council and will contribute to progress towards the SDGs. To summarize, this slide highlights 3 key mechanisms we use in food policy to implement a multi-stakeholder food systems approach: strengthening whole of government collaboration, fostering connections across sectors of the food system, and increasing coherence on policies and programs. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, having the food policy in place allowed the Government of Canada to respond quickly to food security challenges that resulted. Existing relationships with other government departments and agencies facilitated the process of developing a response across the different mandates, and existing partnerships established during the food policy development process with nonprofit organizations enable the government to work with trusted partners to roll out emergency food security programming that took into consideration shared objectives across departments. Moving forward, we'll continue applying the multi-stakeholder process I described today to further develop the policy and to go through a continuous cycle of identifying priorities and developing collaborative solutions with partners and stakeholders. We look forward to participating in global discussions on food systems to learn about what other countries are doing, and very much look forward to participating in the Food Systems Summit process over the upcoming year. Thank you again. I look forward to our panel discussion.
Thanks so much, Jason. I think you know that many of us turn to Canada as a really promising example of food policy building at the federal level that we can all learn from. So thanks for this. And also just thanks to all of our speakers at this point for your really rich contributions. I think we can clearly see from these many different approaches that there's quite a bit of complexity to all of this. There's a lot of challenges, and it really just means that we need to figure out ways to translate global goals like the SDGs and other platforms into these clear positive initiatives with concrete impacts on the ground. I think these presentations have also served to emphasize that more inclusive and participatory governance and multi-stakeholder mechanisms are a fundamental approach to structure collective action. So having heard from everyone, we'd just like to bring this all into conversation now and hear from everyone again. I think at this stage, we all recognize the need for collaboration, as I said, but we're still seeing difficulties in implementation. So the first question that I had was about the challenges with all of this. So I'd like each of you to bring up one main challenge that you see in engaging in multi-stakeholder collaborations and how that can be addressed. And if specifically you could give us concrete examples from your own work to explain this. And maybe I'll go in order of the speakers. So I'll turn to Francesco first to answer the question in 1 minute, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chantal. Well, I think first of all, we need to have aligned goals. And this is a problem, because profit sometimes is in opposition to health and environmental objectives. But then we need engagement rules. We need a safe space for engagement. And my concrete example is the dialogue on reformulation led by countries like Canada or Norway or UK. That safe space was there. So there must be a clear ask from the public sector. There must be a clear commitment, a clear accountability mechanism, and transparency of all that. And if this is all clear and regulated, I think it's definitely much better for this engagement.
Thanks so much, and thank you for being brief, which is an example for everyone. I'll turn to Julia next.
Thank you. To build on what Francesco has said, I think it's really important, especially in this age of COVID, for us to pay very close attention to access issues. It's how do we level the playing field? When we're talking about multi-stakeholder engagement, we have the business sector that has enormous access, enormous resources. We have governments, and then we have civil society, which is often challenged from a resource and access perspective. And now in the age of COVID, where in theory it would be easier because there's less travel, accommodation costs, and the visas, which are often an obstacle for civil society, especially grassroots participants. So that's off the table. But now we're seeing that, the digital divide is playing a very important role in not providing access. As an example, I was recently one of 2 delegates for the first time that the high-level meeting of the DAC, OECD DAC, invited civil society as observers. So we had a northern civil society person, myself, and a southern colleague from Nigeria. And he couldn't connect. It was during the riots in Nigeria, the protesting, the government shut down the internet, so he couldn't participate. And I had to step in, which was not the idea. It was really to hear more from him coming from the Global South. So this digital divide and access generally, but especially now in the time of COVID, is something we need to pay close attention to.
Thanks, that's a really fantastic point, just showing how the current situation is playing out to increase power disparities in some ways. Carmen, your 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Chantal. Thank you, Julia, for highlighting that point. Then I'll mention another challenge. So the preliminary findings of the study show that in any case, multi-stakeholder collaboration takes resources, namely money and time. So it's not that difficult in general to engage stakeholders for preliminary meetings, even food systems mappings like first activities, but engaging multi-stakeholder collaboration in the long term really takes financial stability and resources allocation. So the fact of durability, I would say, is a really challenge for this kind of mechanisms. And maybe a good example of durability in the long term is the Conseil National de l'Alimentation in France. This is a very good example of multi-stakeholder collaboration that started a very long time ago and that is really participatory and really.
Thank you, and thanks for the example. Esther.
Yes, thank you. Just to connect with what Julia said, so one challenge is for family farmers is the language barrier, especially in Asia Pacific when one country is one language and family farmers do not usually speak English. So we thought during the COVID time with virtual events, it would be easier, but it was really also difficult because the family farmers who cannot travel, so they have to stay at home, but their areas do not have good internet connectivity, or sometimes there is no electricity. So what we did when we had our virtual conference last October was to really ask our funder, our partner funder, to say we must pay for the farmer to travel from their home to the nearest city where there is internet. And if they have, because it's a 2-day meeting, we have to pay also for their accommodation and for their meals, because otherwise, and then there should be also translation. Okay, because otherwise they will not be able to contribute. And again, also the second is the ability, ability of the farmers to understand macro complex abstracts, like micro concepts, and also having assertiveness in negotiations, because the culture of family farmers is usually they are passive, they are like submissive. So what we do, for example, in GAPSP or during the Farmers Forum process, was to create autonomous space. Before, we have a briefing where we talk about the issues, discuss, and come up with recommendations, and role play who will talk what issue like that. And after that, we also again have a debriefing to assess how we have negotiated or articulated our position. That way, we are able to learn from the experience and build our capacities. Thank you.
Thank you. These are really practical examples. Huram, what's the challenge that you faced?
In that process, we are trying to ensure the participation of everyone by creating local municipal services together. I mean, in our initiative, we provide women producers to produce in their own environment, and we provide them a special area, a special place without any cost. Then they could involve that process by their natural environments. I mean, we try to create possible local services for their globalization with their ideas and with their possibilities.
Thank you so much for that. And Jason, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chantal. I think one of the biggest challenges when we bring together diverse perspectives with objectives that may not seem to align or do not align on the surface, but to engage in thoughtful discussion among participants, and very much focusing on an outcomes-based approach. Oftentimes, people can agree on the importance of outcomes, but it's how we get there that can be a challenge. And so, from there, to enable those discussions and to share perspectives that may not necessarily be fully understood. And kind of a second element, I think, is to show examples where there have been successes and things that can be built upon in terms of demonstrating what is possible. I think a good example in Canada's progress towards reducing food waste. One can see the positive benefits for the food and agriculture sector from an efficiency-based perspective, the benefits to consumers, the environmental sustainability, of course, and as well from a health-based perspective, recognize that much of the food wasted is oftentimes healthy, nutritious food. And so, and then bring those partners together to discuss how an integrated approach could be taken to addressing these challenges.
Thanks. Yes, that is a big challenge, that making those connections is not always intuitive to people. So now that we've heard from all of these challenges, I was hoping to turn it to solutions and recommendations to continue on a more forward-looking note. And I'd like to propose 2 questions that the speakers can choose from. You now have 90 seconds to respond, so just a little bit more time. But again, thanks for staying brief. The first option is that a few of you brought up gender or working directly with farmers as something that's really central to your work. And so we know that certain marginalized groups often lack voice or representation in processes of change. So my question is, how do we really ensure genuine participation and inclusion of all groups when we're dealing with multi-stakeholder processes? So essentially, what does real participation look like to you? Otherwise, the second question you can answer is that, as we just said, I think people often see the need to connect different areas of the food system in multi-stakeholder collaborations, but often connecting different governance levels, so connecting the local to the international or to the national, is not as intuitive. So do you see these connections as important, and how have you specifically been trying to address this work and create those connections? For the first question on participation, I know Carmen, Julia, and Huram had something to say about it, so I'll let you speak first. Carmen, go ahead.
Thank you, Chantal. Yes, I think the question really relates to some of the key challenges of multi-stakeholder partnerships, collaboration mechanisms, inclusiveness, trust, representativeness, legitimacy, and even democracy. So maybe 3 quick points I'd like to mention. First of all, we usually see concretely that participation, inclusive participation and meaningful participation it's easier at local level. Maybe that relates to the closeness of actors, to close connections to governments, to close connection also to the food problems at hand, but it's usually easy. Then the second point about a genuine participation, and I really like Esther's examples, is that in general, these mechanisms have defined some good governance principles, let's say, and they are always innovating in the way they can ensure that all voices are heard, but also taken into account. So we see very different formats and a lot of innovation around that. So that's very good. And maybe the last point is that we've identified that to promote inclusiveness and participation, multi-stakeholder mechanisms usually use a mix of both participatory democracy approaches and deliberative democracy approaches. What do I mean? In general, they engage wider audiences at certain stages. For instance, for policy formulation, as the example of Canada, and almost all examples, usually they engage large audiences through different mechanisms. And then they use representatives from representative groups of the food system to conduct further steps for other. So participation, you have to define what does it mean to engage different pieces depending on the point of the policy that you are.
Absolutely, thanks. Julia, go ahead.
Thank you. So as I've mentioned already, we see the barriers to participation as fundamentally an issue of power and imbalances. So how do we address that? A couple of thoughts. One is that several civil society organizations in the context of the 75th anniversary of the UN are recommending that civil society have an envoy at the UN whose focus would be to ensure inclusive participation of civil society in different multilateral UN structures. So to have a focal point of somebody who has that mandate to be creative, innovative, and to try new ways to engage diversity of civil society would be, we think, important to move this agenda forward. Second, referring back to the pointer on access and how complex that is, I also think Esther gave some great examples of how, if we're committed to meaningful participation, it's going to require resources, funding for sure, but time. So, working with groups or providing the resources so that work can be done in advance of some of these multi-stakeholder meetings with with groups that have, language barriers, digital barriers, preparing videos instead of expecting people to be able to join a live session because there might, not be possible. Take all the measures that are possible to prepare the ground, to level the playing field. Is going to require a lot of resources and dedication and real commitment. So advocate on behalf of these groups, create the space, make sure that the funding is available and the advanced planning so that those voices can really be heard. We're focusing on smallholder women farmers, and Esther has spoken very clearly to some of the limitations, but those voices are so important that they be heard in this context. And finally, I would just mention that the CFS has been a multi-stakeholder participatory example for other initiatives around increasing participation. And so we really should uphold, defend, and move forward on those good examples that we have already. Thank you.
Thank you. A really good point. Huram, please, your answer, and thank you for keeping it brief.
Okay. First of all, we try to, as I mentioned, we try to understand their needs, and then we try to make them come together and try to understand each other, and then we provide them an environment where they can feel comfortable and where they can really share their feelings, and then we try to include them into the problem, and we try to make them to understand how we can solve the problem together. And then we try to understand our situations and try to create solutions together from all different levels of myself or different relations or different cultures, people. That's our way of.
Thanks. Yes, and trust and relationship building, I think, are really important aspects of this work. So thanks for raising that. Francesco, I don't know if you prefer to answer this question or the second one, but I let you choose as we're sort of bridging between the two.
Thank you. Maybe the second one. Yeah, definitely the connection between different levels of governance is critical. And I think Jason spoke about the multi-sectoral, so in a sense, across the same level. But I'd like to give a couple of examples about the importance of these alignments from global to regional, national, subnational. And, first one is, the regulations around food standards and the Codex Alimentaris. We have a very good governance mechanism, but in a sense, it's also related to the other question. It needs to be inclusive because what we see there is sometimes low-income countries are not very well represented. It's an issue of time, capacity, but that alignment is critical. So Codex Standard is an example of collaboration, but also requiring then a national uptake, which is a challenge as well. So I mean, it has to go both sides. But it's a good instrument and a good tool. And the other example I'd like to make is around food reformulation. We talk about improving the nutritional quality of food by reducing sodium, eliminating trans fat. But there's so different standards. We need to have really a common way, a common set of benchmarks across different levels, across could work for small and medium enterprises and large multinationals. So I think there must be an effort to have that common discussion of global references and look at local adaptation of those references.
Thanks so much for that. Jason, did you want to pick up on this question as well?
Sure, thank you so much, and thank you, Francesco. Maybe I'll just start by knowing that Canada is incredibly diverse in terms of its landscape and communities from urban to rural to remote, and recognizing that these communities face diverse challenges and wide range of solutions could come into play in terms of how the communities may work towards addressing those challenges. And so as part of the food policy, we certainly recognize the importance for community-based solutions. as well as also important to recognize that we have a government-to-government, to nation-to-nation relationship with our Indigenous partners, and commitments to work directly with our Indigenous partners in a distinctions-based approach. And as part of the food policy, working towards self-determination of Indigenous peoples from a food systems-based perspective to strengthen Indigenous food systems. And maybe just to pick up on a couple of things too, we also have to consider within Canada, provincial and territorial jurisdiction. For example, agriculture is a shared jurisdiction, a federal provincial shared jurisdiction, whereas health and education is a provincial and territorial jurisdiction. And I guess further to my presentation about considering to work along a wide range of stakeholders and perspectives, civil society, academia, industry, among others as well. And so it's quite rich and complex in terms of navigating, but incredible opportunities exist when we look to bring together these perspectives in order to make progress towards positive food systems change.
Thanks for that. And Esther, please close us out. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the connections between local, national, and international governance processes is very important. We are feeling that because, for example, with GAPSP, and with IFAD, so we are part of maybe the partnership and decision-making process at the international level. But when we go down to the national level, we see, for example, governments implementing the projects funded by GAPSP or funded by IFAD without involving the farmers, especially the organized farmers groups. And because of that, there is no ownership and there is no stakeholdership. And then sometimes the projects are not very effective or not very relevant to family farmers. So how do we do it? So it is good that GAPSP and IFAD gives some funding for regional organizations and national organizations to reach out at the local level, raise awareness, for example, about the project, what is the criteria, and then and say, for example, that this is something that you can do, and then facilitate the interaction between the government and the supervising entity and the farmers. We are leveraging, for example, ALPA, we are leveraging our position in GAPSP and our position in IFAD to tell the governments that, hey, we have this mandate, for example, to monitor and to facilitate the engagement of farmers organizations in your projects at the national level. Thanks a lot for that.
I didn't want to forget the questions that have been asked in the chat box. There's some really good comments and we've been looking at all of them. So thanks for those. But perhaps to pick up on a few of the important ones, perhaps I'll start by bringing this one to maybe Carmen and Francesco and anyone else who has points to raise about it. And it was about private sector involvement. So sort of what is the expectation of private sector involvement in our food system transition, and more specifically at the Food System Summit? Because we know that we're not just talking about food producers as the private sector, but also interested private sector companies, etc. So anyone who has some say on that can please jump in.
I mean, one very simple thing that would be to request the food manufacturers to eliminate trans fat, toxic elements in food, reduce sodium, sugar, so change the formulation of certain products. The second one would be to change marketing practices and stop promoting products that are not aligned with food-based dietary guidelines.
Thank you. Carmen, did you have an answer to that, as the question was directed originally at you?
Yes, okay. Now, maybe one important insight from the study that I can share with you before, of course, the study is published, the initiative is finished because it's an ongoing project, is the case of Denmark. In Denmark, they have like this multi-stakeholder mechanism called Organic Denmark, involving different private sector actors, and actually the combination or the collaborative work between the government and Organic Denmark has really led to very concrete successes and concrete achievements for the implementation of the Organic Action Plan. So it is a combination of both the political will, and that means public procurement on organic products, all sorts of activities, but the combination of that with a market-led approach, so the buy-in also from the private sector and the collaboration via this multi-stakeholder platform that really led to very concrete, I think it's the most successful example we've found in terms of implementation and concrete achievements on the ground. So I would say that that example shows that it's really.
Thanks, a really great example. And I know that we're arriving at time, but we'll probably go over by about 5 minutes just because we started a little bit late. And Esther, I think you had a comment to make on this one as well.
Yes, thank you, Chantal. So please, I would just, when we talk of private sector, we immediately think the big agribusiness, no? But actually, we are saying also family farmers, especially as an aggregate, is the biggest private sector, the biggest investor in agriculture. So especially when they are organized as business entities, like in cooperatives, they go into the full value chain from production to processing to marketing and distribution. So these cooperatives can do sustainable production, because most of the family farmers organizations, they were founded based on some social and just and sustainable development principles, especially those who are involved in the rights-based approach, to sustainable development. So there is work there is promise there, and there is work in investing in family farmers cooperatives to do sustainable production and consumption and to strengthen the local food systems. In COVID, we realized that it's the local food system who fed the people in the cities. And if only we can help the local farmers in bringing their products to the cities through cooling facilities, through less transport restrictions, we will do a lot in terms of eradicating even poverty and hunger, both in the rural and urban areas. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I think you've actually just answered another question that was in the chat, which was about how we link the UN Decade for Family Farming and the Sustainable Food Systems discussion. But I think that link is clear, and a lot of you have been making it throughout this discussion. Another question was about, again, these important aspects about power imbalances and having stakeholders that are not normally at the table. And we've already talked about this in terms of participation and representation. But there was a specific question about how will the Food Systems Summit implement this crucial recommendation? And maybe we can just broaden the conversation a bit more to say how we've done this before. So I'm thinking specifically of maybe Jason sharing some experiences from Canada, or others who have a say about this question as well.
Thank you very much, Chantal. I think I mentioned as part of my my presentation the consultations that we're undertaking to develop a food policy for Canada, and it was a very comprehensive approach in terms of engaging a wide range of Canadians, particularly representing those who may experience food system equities, who may not traditionally have a voice in terms of the normal course of engagement with government, and ensuring that those voices are heard. I think also the importance of engaging people in the manner in which they would like to be engaged, specifically the context of engaging with their Indigenous partners, working with them to determine from a self-determined based approach, how would they like to be involved in terms of the development of the policy, and that resulted in self-led engagement among our Indigenous partners and some excellent work that followed that to help inform the policy itself. Maybe I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. I think you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. 2 points. First of all, for us, it's concerning for many of us in civil society that the summit is not building on the experience of the CFS. As Jason was saying, the importance of a self-organizing space, and that space has been negotiated and crafted so carefully. So to kind of by-step it is not a good sign. So we really would urge summit organizers to rethink that and to see how they can build on the fantastic organization and involvement that has already existed in the sector. My second point relates to the previous question a bit around business, and acknowledging what Esther has said, that the private sector is much broader than just agribusiness. However, when we think about the engagement of agribusiness, we do have to be careful. I heard somebody say recently that, if you're having a summit on lung cancer and you give a prominent place at the table to the cigarette manufacturing industry, you have to really be very careful. And so this has to be managed very carefully. And, we're calling for continued engagement around the human rights and business and human rights work that has to be a binding treaty and has to move forward in order for this balance to be established. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So apologies for not getting to all of your questions in the chat, but we've noted those all down for further discussion. We've read them all about M&E, about training on scaling up local food system governance. But maybe what I wanted to do is end with a 10 or 20-second lightning round of answers from each of you, which is about key solutions. So again, one of the aims of this conference is to identify game-changing solutions for food system change in the lead up to the Food System Summit specifically. So can you share in 20 seconds or less what your game-changing solution is? And I'll start maybe with Khurram. And you're muted. I guess while we settle that, I'll start with Carmen then, and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Chantal. Well, I guess we're all going to say there is no silver bullet, right? There is not really one game-changing solution. I think there's many, and they really have to be conscious. So the game-changing solutions have to be defined by all stakeholders together in an inclusive way, as we keep repeating in this session. And so I would say that maybe these kind of multi-stakeholder collaboration mechanisms could be a game-changing solution, as long as we make sure they learn from each other, they keep updating the knowledge base, and we also share experiences so that they can become more effective, more inclusive.
Thanks. I'll go to Francesco next.
Yeah, we need solutions across the value chain, from production, distribution, availability, affordability. But if I only have a single bullet, let me aim at public food procurements. I mean, that's where government spends a lot of money, and it has the opportunity to be a good example, shape the market. So just in Europe, 82 billion euros per year spent on public food procurement, 1/3 in schools. If all those schools, civil service building, hospitals, prisons, universities, social restaurant could offer sustainable, healthy diet, that would be a big game changer.
Thanks. Khurram, go ahead.
Thanks. Our main solution will be our food market. I mean, women producers markets, because with that markets they provide environment for women for being an entrepreneur, and also we are providing a platform for consumers who will reach sustainable and also organic foods. I mean, fruit and vegetables. They can buy all seasonable products from that women food producer markets from the producers directly, without any other any other how can I tell that? Without anyone. I mean,
sure. Sure. Thanks, Jason. Your silver bullet, even though there aren't silver bullets.
Yeah, I think Carmen did a great job of kicking things off in that respect, and I couldn't agree more. I think it's going to require hard work, collaboration, continued progress, and looking for those incremental gains that can be achieved. I think one key takeaway might be the importance of considering interdependent social health, environmental, and economic outcomes in terms of when we do look towards the food system, and to consider those as interdependent, and to show progress across each of those respective outcomes.
Thanks so much. Esther, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I think if all multi-stakeholders from the donors, the governments, to the intergovernmental organization, private, the agribusinesses, the farmers, the CSOs, the media, the academe, the research institutions. We all agree on a kind of production and processing and marketing that achieve the multiple wins: increased production, increased incomes, increased biodiversity, increased soil health, increased health and nutrition, increased empowerment. I think we can do it, no? Especially knowing that agroecology, for example, integrated diversified farming, investing in full value chain with family farmers, organizations, and cooperatives at the heart and at the center of it all. I think that is the transformation in agriculture that we all need. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Julia, the final word.
Thank you. To build on what everybody said, I think we recognize the interrelated nature of these dynamics, but also the multiple crises that we're facing. And localized agroecology, we believe, would hit all those targets. Climate change, the inequity, of course, food insecurity, nutrition, and the power imbalances that exist in the sector at present. So really localizing, prioritizing localized production through agroecology models would, we believe, address all these interrelated crises and put us in a much better place moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So thanks again to everyone for all of your contributions. It was a great discussion, and apologies for running over time. With that, just please do stay tuned for some side events that are relevant to our discussion today. I know Carmen mentioned one. There's another one on the cost of achieving SDG 2, and another one happening on unsustainable animal production, so how to reduce that. Just to recap very quickly, I think we know that there's still challenges in the implementation of these mechanisms. I think it takes flexibility and trust and adaptability and collective intelligence and patience to really happen properly, but it's still worth trying to do those things and experimenting and innovating to make them happen. So hopefully all of the messages shared here will be carried to the Food Systems Summit, since we're on the road there in June of this year, or of this coming year. But again, thanks to our speakers for sharing their experiences and expertise. And again, for all the participants for your comments in the chat and for your attention. And I wish you a good rest of conference. Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you. Bye.